My name is Sarah, and I'm 24 years old. For as long as I could remember, home was a cozy, two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, filled with years of memories, laughter, and the comforting aroma of my mom's baking. My dad passed away when I was 16, leaving my mom, Carol, and me to navigate life together. We were a close-knit team, supporting each other through thick and thin. Mom worked tirelessly as a librarian, a job she adored, surrounded by the stories she loved. I was in my final year of college, juggling classes with a part-time job at a local coffee shop, dreaming of a future as a graphic designer. Life wasn't always easy, but it was stable, predictable, and filled with love. Or so I thought. One blustery October afternoon, I came home from work to find a moving van parked in front of our house. Panic seized me. Had I gotten the address wrong? Was this some kind of mistake? I ran to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest, and fumbled with my keys. The door swung open to reveal a scene of utter chaos. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in the living room, furniture was draped in protective cloths, and two men in overalls were hauling our beloved, overstuffed couch towards the door. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling. One of the movers stopped and looked at me with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "We're here to clear out the house, ma'am. Foreclosure." Foreclosure. The word hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. This couldn't be happening, not to us. I pushed past the movers and frantically searched for my mom. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen. "Mom, what is going on?" "Why are they taking our things?" She hesitated, her gaze shifting nervously around the room before finally meeting mine. "Sarah, I have something to tell you." Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with shame and regret. I've been gambling." Gambling? My mind struggled to comprehend what she was saying. My mom, the woman who spent her evenings reading classic literature and baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. "What? Gambling? Mom, you've never even bought a lottery ticket." She hung her head, tears streaming down her face. "It started small," she confessed, her voice cracking. "Just a little online poker, a way to unwind after work. But then it spiraled out of control. I started chasing my losses, trying to win back what I'd lost. I took out a second mortgage on the house. I thought I could win it back, Sarah. I really did." The truth crashed over me like a tidal wave, washing away the comfortable reality I had always known. Our house, our security, our future, all gone, gambled away on a foolish, reckless addiction. "How could you do this, Mom?" I cried, my voice filled with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "How could you risk everything we had?" She reached out to me, her hand trembling. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant for this to happen. I was so stupid, so irresponsible." I pulled away from her touch, unable to bear the sight of her remorse. "Sorry isn't good enough, Mom. Sorry doesn't give us back our house. Sorry doesn't fix this." I turned and fled the house, the image of the movers carrying away our belongings burned into my mind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there, watching our lives crumble before my eyes. I walked for hours, lost in a haze of disbelief and anger. How could my mother, the person I trusted most in the world, betray me like this? Where would we go? What would we do? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets, I found myself standing in front of the local community center. On a whim, I went inside, seeking some kind of refuge from the storm raging within me. That decision, I would later realize, was the first step on a long and winding road to revenge, a road I never imagined I would travel. What I discovered inside the community center that night would change everything. I wandered aimlessly through the brightly lit hallways of the community center, the sounds of laughter and activity, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. I passed a room where a group of seniors were playing bingo, another where children were taking a dance class, and finally, I stumbled upon a small, unassuming room with a sign that read, "Financial Literacy Workshop." Intrigued, I cautiously peeked inside. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile stood at the front of the room, addressing a small group of people. She was talking about budgeting, saving, and managing debt. It wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but something about her calm demeanor and practical advice drew me in. I quietly slipped into a seat at the back of the room and began to listen. The woman, whose name was Ms. Rodriguez, spoke with a clarity and passion that captivated me. She explained complex financial concepts in a way that was easy to understand. and she emphasized the importance of taking control of one's financial future. As I listened to her words, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this mess. After the workshop, I approached Ms. Rodriguez and shared my story, my voice trembling as I recounted the devastating loss of our house and my mother's gambling addiction. She listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When I finished, she gently placed a hand on my arm. "Sarah," she said, "I'm so sorry to hear what you're going through, but don't give up hope. There are resources available to help you and your mother, and more importantly, you have the strength within you to overcome this challenge." She gave me a list of organizations that offered free financial counseling and support for gambling addiction. She also suggested that I explore legal options, such as bankruptcy or suing the online gambling sites that had preyed on my mother's vulnerability. "Knowledge is power, Sarah," she said. "The more you understand your options, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions and protect yourself." I spent the next few weeks immersing myself in the world of finance and law. I devoured books and articles on personal finance, debt management, and bankruptcy. I researched the legal liabilities of online gambling companies and the regulations governing their operations. I attended support group meetings for families affected by gambling addiction, where I met other people who had experienced similar situations. Hearing their stories and sharing my own helped me feel less alone and gave me the courage to keep fighting. I also confronted my mother about her addiction. It was a painful and difficult conversation, filled with tears, anger, and accusations. But ultimately, it was necessary. I told her that I couldn't forgive her for what she had done until she took responsibility for her actions and sought professional help. To my surprise, she agreed. She enrolled in a gambling addiction treatment program and began attending therapy sessions. It was a long and arduous process, but she was committed to recovery, and I was determined to support her every step of the way. As I delved deeper into the intricacies of our financial situation, I uncovered a shocking truth. My mother had been hiding more than just her gambling addiction. I discovered a series of suspicious transactions in her bank statements, transfers of large sums of money to unknown accounts. I confronted her about it, and she initially denied any wrongdoing. But eventually, she broke down and confessed. She had been embezzling money from the library where she worked, using it to fund her gambling habit. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Embezzlement. My mother, a respected librarian, a pillar of the community, it was beyond comprehension. I knew that she had committed a serious crime, one that could land her in prison. But I also knew that she was sick, a victim of a powerful and destructive addiction. I was torn between my duty to report her crime and my desire to protect her. After agonizing over the decision, I decided to consult with a lawyer. I explained the situation to him, and he advised me to come clean to the authorities. He warned me that if I tried to cover up my mother's crime, I could be charged as an accomplice. He also suggested that my mother might receive a more lenient sentence if she confessed voluntarily and cooperated with the investigation. With a heavy heart, I convinced my mother to confess to her employer and the police. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the right thing to do. My mother was arrested and charged with embezzlement. The library conducted an internal audit and discovered the full extent of her theft. The news sent shockwaves through our small town, shattering my mother's reputation and leaving me feeling utterly humiliated. As my mother awaited trial, I focused on picking up the pieces of our shattered lives. I dropped out of college to work full-time, taking on extra shifts at the coffee shop and doing freelance graphic design work in my spare time. I found a small, affordable apartment for my mother and me to live in, a far cry from the cozy house we had lost. I was exhausted, stressed, and heartbroken, but I refused to give up. I was determined to rebuild our lives, to hold my mother accountable for her actions, and to seek justice for the wrongs that had been done to us. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight. I was ready to take revenge. But against whom? The answer came to me in a most unexpected way, a seemingly insignificant detail that would ultimately lead me down a path of calculated retribution. During my investigation into my mother's gambling addiction, I stumbled upon a disturbing pattern. The online gambling sites she had been using were not licensed or regulated in the United States. They were operating illegally from offshore locations, preying on vulnerable individuals like my mother, with no regard for the devastating consequences of their actions. These companies were making billions of dollars in profits, while families like mine were being destroyed. I was outraged. I knew that these companies were not only responsible for my mother's addiction, but also for the loss of our house, her embezzlement, and the shame and humiliation we had both endured. I decided to take action. I started researching the online gambling industry, learning everything I could about its structure, its operations, and its legal loopholes. I discovered that many of these companies were owned by wealthy and powerful individuals who were hiding behind layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. They were masters of deception, adept at evading law enforcement and exploiting loopholes in the legal system. I knew that taking them down would be a monumental challenge, but I was determined to try. I started by gathering evidence. I collected my mother's gambling records, bank statements, and email correspondence. I documented the deceptive marketing practices of the online gambling sites, their use of predatory algorithms to keep players hooked, and their failure to provide adequate safeguards against addiction. I also reached out to other victims of online gambling, sharing my story and asking for their help. To my surprise, many people were eager to join my cause. They had lost their savings, their homes, and their families to online gambling, and they were desperate for justice. Together, we formed an online support group and began to organize protests and petition campaigns. We contacted journalists and politicians, sharing our stories and demanding that they take action to regulate the online gambling industry. Our efforts started to gain traction. The media began to pay attention to our cause, publishing articles and airing news stories about the dark side of online gambling. Politicians started to introduce legislation aimed at cracking down on illegal gambling sites and protecting consumers from predatory practices. As our movement grew, I became increasingly focused on one particular company that had played a significant role in my mother's downfall: Golden Chance Casino, an online gambling site that was notorious for its aggressive marketing tactics and its lack of responsible gaming safeguards. Golden Chance Casino was owned by a shadowy figure named Victor Martel, a billionaire businessman with a reputation for ruthlessness and a long history of skirting the law. Martel was a master manipulator, adept at using his wealth and power to influence politicians, silence critics, and evade prosecution. I knew that he was the key to bringing down the entire online gambling empire, but I also knew that he would be a formidable opponent. I decided to infiltrate Golden Chance Casino and gather evidence from the inside. I created a fake online profile and applied for a job as a customer service representative. To my surprise, I was hired almost immediately. The training was minimal, and the emphasis was on keeping customers happy and encouraging them to keep gambling, regardless of their financial situation. I quickly learned that Golden Chance Casino was a den of corruption, where employees were encouraged to lie, cheat, and manipulate customers to maximize profits. I was disgusted by what I saw, but I knew that I had to play along if I wanted to gather the evidence I needed. I started documenting everything: the company's deceptive marketing practices, its predatory algorithms, and its failure to protect vulnerable customers. I also began to secretly record conversations with my colleagues and supervisors, capturing their admissions of wrongdoing. It was risky, but I was determined to expose Golden Chance Casino and bring Victor Martel to justice. As I delved deeper into the company's operations, I discovered a secret that could potentially bring down the entire online gambling empire. Golden Chance Casino was laundering money for organized crime syndicates, using its online platform to process billions of dollars in illegal funds. The money was being funneled through a network of offshore accounts, making it virtually impossible to trace. I realized that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than I had initially anticipated. This wasn't just about my mother's gambling addiction. It was about a vast criminal enterprise that was corrupting governments and destroying lives around the world. I knew that I had to expose this conspiracy, but I also knew that I was putting myself in grave danger. Victor Martel and his associates were not people to be trifled with. They had the resources and the connections to make me disappear without a trace. But I couldn't back down. I had come too far, and I had too much at stake. I was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The risks were escalating rapidly, and I knew my time was running out. I needed to find a way to expose Victor Martel and his criminal enterprise before they discovered my true identity and silenced me forever. I decided to leak the information I had gathered to the media. I contacted a well-known investigative journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption and holding powerful people accountable. I shared my story with him, providing him with copies of my documents, recordings, and other evidence. He was initially skeptical, but after reviewing the evidence, he became convinced that I was telling the truth. He agreed to help me expose Golden Chance Casino and Victor Martel, but he warned me that it would be a dangerous undertaking. He advised me to go into hiding and to protect my identity at all costs. I took his advice and disappeared from my apartment, leaving only a note for my mother explaining that I was going away for a while and that I would contact her when it was safe to do so. I went to stay with a friend in another state, where I lay low and waited for the journalist to publish his story. A few weeks later, the story broke. It was a bombshell. The journalist exposed Golden Chance Casino's money laundering operations, its predatory practices, and its connections to organized crime. He revealed Victor Martel's long history of corruption and his efforts to evade law enforcement. The story went viral, sparking outrage around the world. Politicians called for investigations, law enforcement agencies launched raids on Golden Chance Casino's offices, and Victor Martel was forced to go into hiding. The online gambling industry was thrown into chaos. The value of online gambling stocks plummeted, and many companies were forced to shut down. My revenge was complete. I had brought down Golden Chance Casino and exposed Victor Martel's criminal enterprise. I had avenged my mother's addiction and the loss of our house, but my victory came at a price. Victor Martel was still at large, and he was determined to get revenge on me. He hired private investigators to track me down, and he put a bounty on my head. I knew that I was living on borrowed time and that I would have to be constantly vigilant to protect myself. I decided to go into the witness protection program, changing my name and moving to a new location where I could start a new life. It was a difficult decision, but I knew it was the only way to ensure my safety and the safety of my mother. As I prepared to enter the witness protection program, I received a phone call from my mother. She had been released from prison and was eager to start rebuilding her life. She had completed her gambling addiction treatment program and was committed to staying sober. She had also found a job at a local library and was slowly regaining the trust of her community. I was overjoyed to hear that she was doing well, and I promised to stay in touch with her as much as possible. Before I hung up, she said something that touched my heart. "Sarah," she said, "I'm so proud of you. You're the strongest person I know. You turned a terrible situation into something positive, and you helped to protect other families from the same fate that befell us. You're a true hero." Her words meant the world to me. I realized that my revenge had not only brought down a criminal enterprise, but it had also helped to heal my family and to give us a new sense of purpose. As I entered the witness protection program, I knew that I was leaving behind a part of my old life. But I also knew that I was carrying with me the lessons I had learned, the strength I had gained, and the determination to continue fighting for justice and protecting the vulnerable. Years passed. I lived under an assumed name, always looking over my shoulder, but slowly building a new life. I finished my college degree online, got a job as a graphic designer, and even started a small business creating websites for local businesses. The fear of being discovered never completely disappeared, but it faded with time. Then, one day, I received a cryptic message through a secure channel I had established with the journalist who had helped me expose Golden Chance Casino. It was a single sentence. "The game is over." My heart leaped into my throat. "The game is over" was the code phrase we had agreed upon to indicate that Victor Martel had been apprehended. I immediately contacted the journalist, who confirmed the news. Martel had been living in exile in a small South American country, but he had been finally captured by Interpol agents and extradited to the United States to face charges of money laundering, fraud, and racketeering. A wave of relief washed over me. The man who had caused so much pain and suffering to me and my family was finally going to be held accountable for his actions. I knew that his trial would be a long and arduous process, but I was determined to attend every hearing and to make sure that justice was served. I contacted the prosecutor in the case and offered to testify against Martel. He was initially hesitant, concerned about the potential risks to my safety. But after I assured him that I was willing to take those risks, he agreed to include me as a witness. The trial began several months later. It was a media circus, with reporters from all over the world descending on the courthouse to cover the proceedings. Martel's lawyers put up a fierce defense, arguing that he was a legitimate businessman who had been unfairly targeted by the government. But the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt, including my testimony, which detailed his criminal activities and his efforts to silence me. After weeks of testimony, the jury finally reached a verdict. They found Victor Martel guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the verdict was read. I felt a sense of closure that I had not thought possible. I had finally achieved justice for my mother, for myself, and for all the other victims of Victor Martel's greed and corruption. With Martel behind bars, I felt safe enough to reclaim my real identity. I legally changed my name back to Sarah and reconnected with my old friends and acquaintances. It was strange at first, returning to the life I had left behind, but I was welcomed with open arms. My mother, who had remained sober and continued to rebuild her life, was overjoyed to have me back. We moved into a small house together, not as grand as the one we had lost, but filled with love and a renewed sense of hope. I continued to run my graphic design business, and I also became an advocate for responsible gambling, sharing my story with others and working to raise awareness about the dangers of online addiction. I even started a foundation to help families affected by gambling addiction, providing them with financial assistance, counseling, and legal support. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that my journey had been a long and difficult one, filled with pain, betrayal, and loss. But it had also been a journey of resilience, courage, and ultimately, redemption. I had learned that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, it is possible to overcome the odds and to create a better future for yourself and for others. And I had learned that revenge, while it can be a powerful motivator, is not always the answer. True justice comes not from seeking retribution, but from working to prevent harm and to heal the wounds of the past. As I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I had not known for many years. I had faced my demons, I had conquered my fears, and I had emerged stronger and wiser than ever before. My revenge had started as a quest for retribution, but it had ultimately transformed into a journey of healing and forgiveness. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. But even as I basked in the warmth of the setting sun, a nagging feeling persisted in the back of my mind. Something was still not quite right. There was a loose end, an unresolved question that continued to haunt me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was another piece of the puzzle that I had yet to find. And as the darkness deepened, I knew that I would not rest until I had uncovered the truth, no matter where it might lead me. The feeling that something was missing gnawed at me for weeks. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my work and my family, but it was always there, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. Finally, I decided that I had to confront it. I started reviewing all the documents and evidence I had gathered during my investigation into Golden Chance Casino. I spent hours poring over bank statements, emails, and financial records, searching for any clue that I might have overlooked. Then, one night, I found it. Buried deep within a file of financial transactions, I discovered a series of payments to a shell corporation that I had not previously identified. The payments were relatively small, but they were consistent, and they originated from a bank account linked to Victor Martel. Intrigued, I started researching the Shell Corporation. I discovered that it was registered in a small island nation in the Caribbean, and that its listed directors were all dummy corporations controlled by a shadowy network of international criminals. As I delved deeper, I uncovered a web of connections that led to some of the most powerful and corrupt individuals in the world: politicians, bankers, and even members of law enforcement. It became clear that Victor Martel was not just a rogue businessman, but a key player in a vast global conspiracy. He was laundering money, financing terrorism, and corrupting governments on a scale that I had never imagined. And the payments to the Shell Corporation were just a small piece of the puzzle. They were a way for Martel to funnel money to his co-conspirators, to reward them for their loyalty and to keep them in line. But who were these co-conspirators? And what were they planning? I knew that I had to find out. I contacted the journalist who had helped me expose Golden Chance Casino and shared my findings with him. He was shocked by what I had discovered, but he was also eager to help me uncover the truth. Together, we launched a new investigation, digging deeper into the web of connections surrounding the Shell Corporation. We traveled to the Caribbean, to Europe, and to Asia, following the money trail and interviewing sources who were willing to risk their lives to expose the truth. As we uncovered more evidence, the scope of the conspiracy became increasingly clear. Victor Martel and his co-conspirators were planning to destabilize governments, to manipulate financial markets, and to create a new world order in which they would be the puppet masters. They were using their wealth and power to buy influence, to silence dissent, and to control the flow of information. And they were willing to stop at nothing to achieve their goals. I realized that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than I had initially anticipated. This wasn't just about my mother's gambling addiction. It was about the future of the world. And I knew that I had to do everything in my power to stop them. The journalist and I worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a case against Martel's co-conspirators. We shared our findings with law enforcement agencies around the world, urging them to take action. But many of them were reluctant to get involved. They were afraid of the power and influence of the individuals we were targeting. They were worried about the potential consequences of exposing such a vast and deeply entrenched conspiracy. But we refused to give up. We knew that the fate of the world depended on it. Finally, after months of relentless investigation, we had enough evidence to take our case to the public. We published a series of articles and reports detailing the conspiracy, exposing the names of Martel's co-conspirators, and outlining their plans to destabilize the world. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People around the world were outraged by what they had learned. They took to the streets, demanding that their governments take action. Politicians who had previously been silent were forced to speak out. Law enforcement agencies that had been reluctant to get involved were now under intense pressure to launch investigations. The conspiracy began to unravel. One by one, Martel's co-conspirators were exposed, arrested, and brought to justice. Their assets were seized, their power was stripped away, and their plans were thwarted. The world was saved from the brink of disaster. As the dust settled, I realized that my revenge had taken on a new and unexpected dimension. It had started as a personal quest for retribution, but it had evolved into a global battle for justice. I had not only avenged my mother's addiction, but I had also helped to protect the world from a dangerous and destructive conspiracy. And I had learned that true revenge is not about inflicting pain and suffering, but about exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable. As I looked out at the world, I felt a sense of hope and optimism that I had not known for many years. The world was not perfect, but it was a better place than it had been before. And I knew that I had played a small part in making it so. But even as I celebrated our victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was not yet over. I knew that there were still other conspiracies lurking in the shadows, waiting to be exposed. And I knew that I would not rest until they were brought to light. My revenge had become a mission, a lifelong commitment to fighting for justice and protecting the vulnerable, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. I had discovered my own strength, my own courage, and my own purpose, and I had learned that even the smallest person can make a difference in the world if they are willing to stand up and fight for what is right. And as the sun rose on a new day, I knew that my journey was far from over. The world was full of darkness, but it was also full of hope, and I was determined to be a beacon of light, shining the truth and fighting for justice until my very last breath. Victor Martel's network had tentacles everywhere, and even with his imprisonment, some of those tentacles continued to twitch, seeking ways to revive his twisted vision. I knew dismantling his legacy would be a long game, a constant vigilance against the forces of greed and corruption that never truly sleep. My work with the Foundation became more critical than ever. We expanded our reach, providing not just financial aid and counseling, but also investigative resources to help families trace the sources of their loved ones' addictions and to hold those responsible accountable. We trained lawyers and investigators to navigate the complex world of online gambling and international finance, empowering them to fight back against the predators who preyed on the vulnerable. I also became a sought-after speaker, sharing my story with audiences around the world. I spoke to students, lawmakers, and business leaders, urging them to be aware of the dangers of unchecked greed and to prioritize ethics and social responsibility. I used my platform to advocate for stronger regulations of the online gambling industry, for greater transparency in financial transactions, and for increased resources for addiction treatment and prevention. My efforts did not go unnoticed. I received awards and accolades for my work, but more importantly, I inspired others to join the fight. A new generation of activists, investigators, and lawmakers emerged, determined to carry on the struggle against corruption and inequality. And as I watched them take up the mantle, I knew that my revenge had truly come full circle. It had started as a personal vendetta, but it had transformed into a global movement for justice. And even though the battle would never be truly won, I knew that we were making progress, one step at a time. But even as I worked to create a better world, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I knew that Martel's associates were still out there, plotting and scheming, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. I took precautions, of course. I maintained a low profile, I avoided unnecessary risks, and I kept my guard up at all times. But I also knew that I couldn't live my life in fear. I had to be willing to take risks, to speak out against injustice, and to continue fighting for what I believed in, even if it meant putting myself in danger. And so, I continued to live my life to the fullest, embracing every opportunity and cherishing every moment. I spent time with my mother, who was now thriving in her recovery. We traveled the world together, we volunteered in our community, and we simply enjoyed each other's company. I also found love again with a kind and compassionate man who understood my past and supported my mission. We built a life together, filled with laughter, adventure, and shared purpose. And as I looked at him, I knew that I had finally found true happiness. But even as I embraced the joys of life, I never forgot my past. I never forgot the pain and suffering that Martel had caused. And I never forgot my vow to seek justice, no matter how long it took. So I continued to investigate, to gather evidence, and to build my case against Martel's remaining associates. I knew that it would be a long and difficult process, but I was determined to see it through. And one day, I knew that I would have my final revenge, not by inflicting pain and suffering, but by exposing the truth and holding them accountable for their actions. By dismantling their network of corruption and ensuring that they could never harm another innocent person. That was my ultimate goal. That was my true revenge. And that was the legacy that I wanted to leave behind. A legacy of justice, of hope, and of unwavering determination in the face of adversity. A legacy that would inspire others to stand up and fight for what is right, no matter the cost. Because in the end, that is all that truly matters. The difference that we make in the world, the lives that we touch, the hope that we inspire. And as I looked out at the future, I knew that I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I had found my purpose, my passion, and my strength, and I was determined to use them to make the world a better place, one small act of justice at a time. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning, and I had a feeling this next chapter was going to be the most challenging one yet. That nagging feeling, it turned out, wasn't just paranoia. It was a premonition. I was Sarah, a 24-year-old graphic designer living in Chicago, or at least I had been. Now I was living under a new name, in a new city, trying to forget the nightmare that had consumed my life. My days were filled with designing websites for local businesses, attending support group meetings for families affected by gambling addiction, and spending time with my mother, Carol, who was now a beacon of strength and sobriety. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a welcome contrast to the chaos and uncertainty of the past. Yet, beneath the surface, a sense of unease lingered. I knew that Victor Martel's influence extended far beyond the walls of his prison cell. His network of corrupt associates was still out there, waiting for an opportunity to strike. I had to be vigilant. My life and the lives of those I loved depended on it. One crisp autumn morning, as I was walking to my office, I noticed a man watching me from across the street. He was tall and muscular, with a shaved head and a menacing glare. He looked like a bodyguard, or worse, a hitman. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace. I ducked into a nearby coffee shop and called the police, reporting the suspicious activity. They promised to send a patrol car to investigate, but I knew that it might not be enough. Martel's reach was vast, and his resources were limitless. He could hire the best assassins in the world, and he wouldn't hesitate to use them to silence me. I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to contact my old friend, the investigative journalist who had helped me expose Golden Chance Casino. He had connections in the underworld, and he might be able to provide me with some information about the man who was watching me. I sent him a coded message, requesting an urgent meeting. He responded immediately, agreeing to meet me at a safe location later that evening. As I waited for the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. I knew that Martel's associates were always one step ahead of me. They had infiltrated my life before, and they could do it again. I had to be careful. I had to trust my instincts. When I finally met with the journalist, he confirmed my worst fears. The man who was watching me was indeed a hitman, hired by Martel's associates to silence me permanently. They were planning to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their operations, and I was at the top of their list. The journalist offered to help me disappear again, to relocate to another city and assume a new identity. But I refused. I was tired of running. I was tired of living in fear. I had spent too many years hiding from my enemies. It was time to face them head on. I decided to go on the offensive, to track down Martel's associates and bring them to justice. I knew that it would be a dangerous undertaking, but I was determined to protect myself and the people I loved. The journalist agreed to help me, providing me with information and resources to aid in my investigation. He warned me that it would be a long and difficult process, but he believed that I was the only one who could stop them. I spent the next several weeks immersing myself in the world of organized crime. I studied the structure of Martel's network, learning about his key associates and their operations. I also learned about the tactics and strategies used by law enforcement agencies to combat organized crime. I discovered that Martel's network was involved in a wide range of illegal activities, including money laundering, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. They were operating in multiple countries, using a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts to conceal their activities. I realized that dismantling this network would be a monumental challenge, but I was determined to try. I started by targeting Martel's closest associates, the individuals who were most directly involved in his criminal activities. I used my skills as a graphic designer to create fake identities and infiltrate their organizations. I gathered evidence, documented their crimes, and reported them to the authorities. One by one, Martel's associates were arrested and brought to justice. Their operations were shut down, their assets were seized, and their power was diminished. But as I dismantled Martel's network, I discovered a disturbing truth. He had a secret weapon, a mole within law enforcement who was protecting his interests and sabotaging my efforts. This mole was a high-ranking official, someone who had access to sensitive information and the authority to influence investigations. I realized that I had to expose this mole if I wanted to truly dismantle Martel's network. But how could I identify him without putting myself in even greater danger? My quest for justice had taken a treacherous turn, and the stakes were higher than ever. The discovery of the mole within law enforcement sent a chill down my spine. It was a betrayal of the highest order, a sign that Martel's influence extended far beyond what I had imagined. I knew that I had to proceed with extreme caution. One wrong move could expose me and jeopardize the entire investigation. I decided to confide in a trusted contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agent who had been instrumental in bringing down Golden Chance Casino. I shared my suspicions about the mole, providing him with the evidence I had gathered. He listened carefully, taking my concerns seriously. He promised to launch an internal investigation to identify the mole, but he warned me that it would be a delicate and time-consuming process. In the meantime, he advised me to take extra precautions to protect myself. I knew that I couldn't rely solely on the Federal Bureau of Investigation to solve this problem. I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to use my skills as a graphic designer to create a honeypot, a fake online identity that would attract the mole's attention. I created a profile that portrayed me as a disgruntled former associate of Martel, someone who was willing to provide information in exchange for protection. I posted messages on encrypted forums frequented by criminals, hinting at my knowledge of Martel's secrets and my desire to betray him. It didn't take long for the mole to take the bait. He contacted me through an anonymous messaging app, offering me a deal. He promised to provide me with protection and financial assistance if I would reveal everything I knew about Martel's operations. I played along, feigning fear and desperation. I agreed to meet him at a secret location to exchange information. As I prepared for the meeting, I knew that I was walking into a trap. The mole was likely planning to kill me as soon as I revealed my secrets, but I had a plan of my own. I had alerted my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who had set up a surveillance team to monitor the meeting. They would be ready to intervene if things went south. When I arrived at the meeting location, I found the mole waiting for me. He was a man in his late 50s with a stern face and piercing eyes. He introduced himself as Agent Thompson, a high-ranking official at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My heart sank. I had trusted this man, and he had betrayed me. He asked me to reveal everything I knew about Martel's operations, promising to protect me from any harm. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go through with my plan. But then I remembered the victims of Martel's crimes, the families who had been destroyed by his greed and corruption. I knew that I couldn't back down. I took a deep breath and began to speak, revealing everything I knew about Martel's network and the mole's involvement. As I spoke, I noticed a subtle change in Agent Thompson's demeanor. He became more agitated, more suspicious. He started asking me questions about my sources, trying to determine if I was working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I deflected his questions, maintaining my composure, but I knew that he was on to me. Suddenly, Agent Thompson pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head. He accused me of betraying him, of setting him up. He said that he had no choice but to silence me permanently. I braced myself for the end, knowing that I had played my hand and lost. But then, just as Agent Thompson was about to pull the trigger, the Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance team stormed into the room. They apprehended Agent Thompson, disarming him and taking him into custody. I was safe, but the ordeal had left me shaken to my core. The betrayal of Agent Thompson was a devastating blow. It shattered my trust in law enforcement and left me wondering who I could truly rely on. I knew that I had to take some time to heal, to process what had happened and to regain my strength. But I also knew that I couldn't give up. Martel's network was still out there, and they were still a threat to the world. I had to find a way to stop them, no matter the cost. As Agent Thompson was led away in handcuffs, he turned to me and smirked. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said. "Martel's legacy will live on, and you will never truly be free." His words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the power and reach of the forces I was fighting. Despite the arrest of Agent Thompson, the task of dismantling Martel's network remained daunting. The organization was a hydra, with new heads emerging as soon as the old ones were severed. I knew that I had to change my strategy, to find a way to strike at the heart of the organization and cripple it permanently. I decided to focus on Martel's finances, to trace his assets, and to expose the individuals and institutions that were enabling his money laundering operations. I enlisted the help of a forensic accountant, a brilliant woman named Emily, who had a knack for unraveling complex financial transactions. Together, we delved into Martel's financial records, tracing his money flows across multiple countries and through a maze of shell corporations. We discovered that Martel was using a network of offshore banks to launder his ill-gotten gains, hiding his assets from law enforcement and evading taxes. These banks were located in countries with lax regulations and a history of corruption, making them ideal havens for criminals like Martel. I decided to expose these banks, to reveal their role in enabling Martel's criminal activities, and to pressure them to change their ways. I contacted a group of investigative journalists who specialized in financial crime, sharing my findings with them. They launched a series of investigations, exposing the offshore banks and their complicity in Martel's money laundering operations. The revelations caused a global scandal, triggering investigations by law enforcement agencies and regulators around the world. The offshore banks were forced to shut down, their assets were seized, and their executives were arrested. Martel's financial empire began to crumble. As his money dried up, his network of corrupt associates began to turn on him. They were no longer willing to risk their lives to protect him, now that he was no longer able to pay them. I watched with satisfaction as Martel's world collapsed around him. He was isolated, abandoned, and facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison. But even as Martel's power waned, I knew that the fight was not yet over. There were still other players in the game, other criminals who were profiting from corruption and exploitation. I had to remain vigilant to continue fighting for justice until the world was truly free from the scourge of organized crime. As I prepared for the next chapter in my fight, I received a mysterious package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box with no return address. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was a bomb, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the box and found a single object inside, a USB drive. I plugged the USB drive into my computer and discovered a hidden file. It was a video recording showing Martel in his prison cell. He was speaking directly to the camera, his eyes filled with rage and hatred. "Sarah," he said, "you may think you've won, but you haven't. I still have one last trick up my sleeve, one last surprise for you." His words sent a chill down my spine. What was he planning? What was his last surprise? I knew that I had to find out before it was too late. The video message from Martel was a chilling reminder that he was still a threat, even behind bars. His words hung in the air, a dark cloud looming over my hard-won peace. I knew that I had to decipher his message, to understand what his last surprise was before he could unleash it. I showed the video to Emily, the forensic accountant, and asked her to analyze it for any hidden clues. She spent hours poring over the footage, examining every frame for subtle details. Finally, she discovered something. In the background of the video, she noticed a faint reflection in a window. By enhancing the image, she was able to make out a partial address. It was a location in a small town in Montana, far from anything I knew about Martel's operations. I was puzzled. What could Martel possibly be planning in Montana? I decided to travel to Montana to investigate. I booked a flight and packed my bags, preparing for the unknown. When I arrived in the small town, I started asking questions, trying to gather information about Martel and his activities. But no one seemed to know anything about him. The town was quiet and unassuming, with a close-knit community that kept to itself. I was starting to think that Emily had made a mistake, that the address was a dead end. But then, I stumbled upon a local antique shop. As I browsed through the dusty shelves, I noticed a photograph on the wall. It was a picture of a group of men standing in front of a large ranch. One of the men looked familiar. It was Martel, younger and thinner, but unmistakably him. I asked the shop owner about the photograph. He told me that the ranch belonged to a wealthy family from out of state, the Carringtons. They were reclusive and rarely seen in town. I realized that the Carrington Ranch was Martel's secret hideout, his last refuge from the world. I decided to investigate the ranch. I drove out to the property and parked my car a safe distance away. I hiked through the woods, approaching the ranch from the back. As I got closer, I could hear voices. I peeked through the trees and saw a group of men gathered around a table. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces grim. I recognized some of them. They were Martel's most trusted associates, the individuals who had managed to evade capture. They were planning something big. I had to find out what it was. I crept closer, trying to eavesdrop on their conversation. But then I stepped on a twig. The men turned their heads, their eyes scanning the woods. I was exposed. They had seen me. There was no turning back now. I had to confront them. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the woods, revealing myself to Martel's associates. They were surprised to see me, but they quickly recovered their composure. They pulled out their guns and pointed them at me. "Sarah," one of them said, "we've been expecting you." My final showdown with Martel's henchmen was about to begin.